Party leaders, take your positions because the gates open tomorrow to the federal election campaign. At 10 a.m. Eastern, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is expected to visit Rideau Hall and formally ask Governor General Julie Payette to dissolve Parliament, setting the stage for a vote on October 21st. The CBC's David Cochrane is here with a preview of what to come. Hello, David.
How you doing?
So let's start with the governing party. What are you hearing from Liberals as they prepare for tomorrow?
Yeah, elections are all about choices, and the Liberals are determined to have this election framed as a choice about who you want to run this country for the next 4 years. What they are keen to avoid is to have this election become a referendum on Justin Trudeau's first term in office, because they know if it's a straight up-down vote, yes or no, were you satisfied or were you disappointed in Justin Trudeau in his first term, that is not a question that works in their favor right now. So instead, they want it to be a choice about who do you want to lead this country over the next 4 years, and making the voters very aware of the consequences of that choice. So look for them to focus very heavily on the differences between Justin Trudeau and Andrew Scheer in particular, highlighting the Stephen Harper factions of the Conservative Party, the Doug Ford connections in the Conservative Party, and hammering that home. We saw some of it in the first Liberal campaign ad where Trudeau was on the bus, with a bunch of presumably ordinary Canadians, but probably not in the back of that bus, talking about, cuts and austerity and the impact that it can have on ordinary people, arguing that is not the way forward. So they want it to be about a choice between him and the other leaders, not a referendum on his first term, because he's no longer the long shot. He's an incumbent, and he brings some baggage on that campaign plane tomorrow once it gets going.
So he and the party don't want it to be a referendum on the past 4 years. I'm guessing the other three parties, four if you count Maxime Bernier's, want it to be a referendum.
I think you're going to see two big lines of attack. One is credibility and one is affordability. The credibility thing, we've seen that already in the Conservative ads. Justin Trudeau, not as advertised. Jagmeet Singh saying that I won't just say the right thing, I will do the right thing. Elizabeth May saying you can't be a climate champion and also buy a pipeline. You look at the India trip, the SNC-Lavalin controversy, the pipeline upsetting some progressives, the broken promise on election reform. Those are the issues I'm talking about on the referendum, because there's that broad coalition of voters that came together to elect Justin Trudeau, and some of them are quite disappointed by these things. And so the splintering of that progressive coalition is a big challenge for them, and one that the other parties want to cement with the attacks on his credibility. But this election, if there's one big issue, it's the pocketbook issue. It's going to be about affordability. We're seeing that with the Conservatives in their ads saying it's time for you to get ahead. You're seeing that with Jagmeet Singh promising to spend bigger than the Liberals on pharmacare, for instance, to help you with drugs, get rid of your student loan debt, or at least the interest on your debt. So they're going after those because the macro numbers on the economy is good right now. I mean, good GDP growth, good job numbers, but there is still a segment of the population, despite the macro numbers, will tell you they're not finding life any easier, and then the Conservatives are arguing life has actually gotten harder under the Liberals. So credibility and affordability will be the two big attacks that we know of right now. Elections have a way of changing, events have a way of barging in, right?
Very, very, very true. Yeah. So what are you hearing from your sources then about the kind of calculation when it comes to how many people need to come out for them? Where do they need to see those people show up? That kind of thing.
So look, if you look at the polls right now, and I know you're going to have a conversation about that coming up, the top level numbers would show you that this is really a race between the Conservatives and the Liberals over who is going to form government. The Conservatives, if you look at the last several elections, they have a base of 5.5 million votes, plus or minus a few 100,000 here or there, a peak of like 5.8 million in 2011 when Harper had a majority government. Their ability to grow that much higher than that is unlikely. Look at the Liberal numbers. They went from 2.7 million in 2011 to 6.9 million in 2015 with the wave elections. That's how Trudeau go from third to first. So they need to hold that coalition together. That's the Liberals' challenge, to motivate that progressive coalition and hold it together and keep the turnout high so that they can keep their numbers up, because that Conservative base is going to come out. If they can suppress turnout on the progressive side or splinter it even further, that 5.5 million Conservative votes, which is 30% in a big election, in a small turnout election becomes 35%, becomes 36%, and gets you into the government territory. So it's like a hold and discourage or hold and suppress for the Conservatives, and a motivate and hold together that coalition for the Liberals.
It's a lot of math. Thanks,
it is a
David.
lot of math. Sorry about that.
Look forward to following you on the campaign trail. The CBC's David Cochrane. So where do the parties stand on the eve of this election campaign, and what parts of the country will see the most closely fought battles? Shachi Curl is the Executive Director of the Angus Reid Institute. She joins us via Skype from Scotland. Christian Bourg is Executive Vice President at Leger. He's in Montreal. And here with me in studio is CBC polls analyst Eric Grenier. Hi, everybody. Great to see you on this election eve. Eric, I'm going to start off with you because like every morning lately, I wake up, I go to the poll tracker, and I noticed today that it was not just, a sort of tie, it was a dead heat.
Yeah, that was a bit of a fun coincidence this morning that it was actually a tie between them. But yeah, we're right now seeing a really close race between the Liberals and the Conservatives. We've been seeing that for a while now. It's been several weeks that, depending on the poll, it's been a gap of 1 point, no points. So right now we are seeing that it is a very close race between the two parties. The New Democrats are now trailing 13%. Some polls have had him even lower than 13%. We see the Greens now at about 11%. They're holding their support as this campaign is approaching. They had that surge earlier in the spring. They're holding those gains that they made back then. The Bloc back at 4%, the People's Party at 3%. But really a tight race between the two parties as we're getting started.
Shachi, when we break that down regionally, what sticks out to you?
So a couple of key battlegrounds, a handful as we continue to talk about. It all comes down to Quebec, Ontario, and British Columbia. And when we look at where the momentum is for the Liberals, that neck and neck situation that Eric has referenced has a lot to do with the fact that we've seen Justin Trudeau and the incumbent Liberal Party continuing to climb out of the hole it created for itself due to the SNC-Lavalin scandal. And so the question is, does that issue start to haunt it? Well, we know, for example, that won't be as much of a factor or as much of a liability in La Belle Province. That is a place where the Liberals are doing very well, where they may be stepping into some trouble, maybe around pressure over Bill 21. And what does the Prime Minister have to say about that? In Ontario, again, it just comes down to the big battlegrounds, the GTA, Greater Toronto, the 905, and in British Columbia, Metro Vancouver. And really, what happens with the left of center? We've already started to notice the Liberals putting more and more daylight between themselves and the Greens and the NDP. That certainly takes a great deal of pressure off of them as they go and call this election, as the Prime Minister goes to visit the Governor General tomorrow morning. The other factor here is, what can Andrew Scheer do to pick up enough of a base to put him in contention? Because really, at the end of the day, on day -1 of the campaign, this is shaping up to be a contest between two parties and two leaders, Justin Trudeau and Andrew Scheer, in those three key battlegrounds.
On this day -1 of the campaign, Christian, if voters were to vote right now in Quebec, what would we see from your perspective?
What we would see is still the Liberals poised to gain some seats in the province of Quebec. Now, there are still 15 seats that belong to the NDP here, and it's at, in the low teens, or even in the we've had them even below 10% for the NDP now in the province. What you would see is that all of these seats potentially would go to either the Liberals, some potentially to the Bloc Québécois, because they're doing just well enough to hope for seat gains. And right now, the Conservatives are not moving. They're in that low 20s, sort of in between 21 and 23% over the last few polls, which suggests that their capacity to gain seats in the province of Quebec is certainly not something that that's in the cards right now as we speak. So if Prime Minister Trudeau sort of avoids the banana peels of Bill 21, for example, and even playing up on the pipeline versus climate change conundrum in the province here, because climate change is a very hot issue in the province right now. If he avoids those two sort of banana peels, the Liberals are still poised to win some seats here in Quebec.
Let me just follow up quickly and ask you, what's the pool of undecided voters like in Quebec?
It's actually fairly low. What we're looking at now, and the question we've had in our latest poll is, who's your second choice? Because we're not finding all that many undecideds, but that 10-11% that's at the Green Party now, and the same for the NDP. What would be your second choice? Because we're seeing that if it comes down to a two-way race between Liberals and Conservatives, is there enough of a pool of voters that could leave those sort of third parties, if you want to call them that, to move back to the Liberals? And where's that pool of second choice votes for the Conservatives? And right now what we're finding is that maybe up to a third of supporters for the Green Party, and the same for the NDP, say they could potentially vote Liberal. But right now, the Conservatives is nobody's second choice, and that could be problematic, certainly in Ontario, as Sachi was pointing out, but the same could apply to Quebec as well.
Shachi, let me ask you on a broader scope about that pool of undecided voters. What's important for us to know about them?
So there's undecideds, as Christiane has pointed out, and then there's uncommitteds. Look, the undecideds represent a minority of the electorate. Everyone is leaning one way or the other. They think they have a choice in mind, but what they're indicating is they could change their mind between now and the third week of October. And so those folks are the uncommitteds. They have a decision, they're leaning in a certain way, but they're still open to be persuaded. They're still malleable. And what's really important to remember about these folks is they tend to skew more left than right on the political spectrum, which means that really the fight can be, has the potential to be among those three parties. Now, again, as we pointed out, and as the guys have pointed out, the NDP and the Greens are seeing that vote suppressed as the Liberals look to make gains among those left of center voters. But we just don't know, it's a cliche, but campaigns matter. They're dynamic, they're alive. But in terms of the issues that are important to those uncommitted voters, improved access to climate action is a big one. Improved access to health care is a big one. Affordability, particularly in the cities, a big issue for voters under the age of 40. And rounding out those top four issues, honesty and transparency in government. So a couple of key areas where the Liberals have a lot to say and have really built out a massive piece of their platform. However, the big liability, especially outside of Quebec, continues to be what happens on the scandal front. Can the Liberals put the ghosts of SNC behind them, or will that come back to haunt and plague them over the course of the campaign? Is that going to be something that is a factor or is a nothing burger?
Eric Shachi mentioned something that's very true. Campaigns always matter. In this case, with the numbers for the Liberals and the Conservatives, you've got to imagine that this campaign is really, really going to matter. Put it in some historical context for us. The last campaign was twice the length. We saw major changes from the beginning of that campaign to the end of the one of the campaign. This one's shorter, but what kind of potential is there for things to change? And historically, how much does that happen?
There's a huge potential, and we saw that not only in the last election, but in the one in 2011 as well. You had changes in support for the parties that in some cases was double digits. So you had this entire chunk of the electorate at the beginning of it said they were going to vote for, in the one case, the Liberals and the Bloc, and then went to the NDP. And in the last campaign that said they were going to vote for the NDP, then went over to the Liberals and to the Liberals. But the Conservatives, the problem for them is that there's not as many opportunities for them to pick up a lot of support. If we're looking back at the various campaigns in the last few years, you have to go back to maybe the 2005-2006 campaign, where the Conservatives were able to make a lot of gains in the course of the campaign. When you're thinking about back in 2008 and back in 2011, it was more about picking up 2 or 3 points, getting the turnout to be advantageous to them. And I think that's the challenge here for Andrew Scheer, is that he doesn't have as much upside. At the height of the SNC-Lavalin affair, there were a few polls that had some very high numbers for the Conservatives, but overall, you still had the Conservatives worse than where they were in 2011. So it suggests that there are there's a limit, there's a ceiling to the Andrew Scheer Conservatives. Now, it could be because a lot of people still have to make up their minds about who Andrew Scheer is, but it does suggest that for the Conservatives, it is all about maximizing the amount of people they can get out to vote for them, and not so much about gaining new voters in the course of that campaign, which means they need the Liberals to drop. Because if it stays the way it is, the Conservatives will lose.
Shachi,
yeah, this is all about the loyalty of the base. And the one thing the Conservatives have going for them is a rock solid base. We see upwards of 80% of the people who voted for the party in 2015 prepared to come out for the party again. It is a pretty unshakable base. And you also see just a palpable anger at the Trudeau government among a very hardcore of the Conservative base who are just so annoyed, particularly in Alberta and in Saskatchewan, that if it was legal, they'd show up and vote 3 times for Andrew Scheer. So the key, again, will not just be in terms of persuading left of center and centrist voters to come on back under the big red tent for Justin Trudeau, but also persuading and galvanizing that base to vote. And of course, he had a lot of momentum. This is all about momentum. Who's got it? Who doesn't have it? Justin Trudeau had the momentum in 2015. You might recall the Liberals were the second choice of not just the NDP in that campaign, but of Conservative Party voters as well.
He made a pretty direct appeal that time, I remember, in the last election.
Big time, and came up the center and really became the leader and the party under which the Stop Harper movement coalesced. They said, this is the guy. This time around, you don't have Stephen Harper after 10 years to kick out of office, so that is less of a motivating factor for the left of center. You don't have, for young people, the specter of legalized marijuana, and you don't have as credible in Justin Trudeau the argument or the persuasive promise that, hey, I'm going to do politics better. I'm going to do politics differently. That's a brand that he's busted. Still, they have a lot to campaign on the policy front, but in terms of the leadership front, it's less of a persuasive and less of a galvanizing message. So the question really becomes, what can the party do to motivate its base, to pull it together and motivate it? And that's why you're seeing the Liberals hammering the Conservatives and Andrew Scheer personally so much on social values issues, on his refusal to march in pride parades, on his past comments on same-sex marriage. Has less to do with who he is today and more to do with how do we really get our base excited.
And that could especially work in Quebec, I'm guessing. Christian, final word to you.
Yeah, same in Ontario. I guess Trudeau needs to find a way to make this race a bit generational. We know climate change is very important to younger Canadians, not as much to older Canadians. His base is very much with the Gen Y, Gen Z that he needs to mobilize, and they need to feel the same urgency to go out and vote that they did in 2015. Another element in there as well that may help is this whole issue of just getting by. What will your government do to help me get by? This whole issue of affordability in major urban centers where those younger generations will become even more crucial. As they find this sort of anxiety in terms of where will I be financially in 5 to 10 years. And I think even though it's underdefined as an issue right now in the electorate, it may become sort of the center of this campaign as we move further down.
All right, I'll leave it there. Thank you, everyone. We'll check in with you again soon. Really appreciate your time this evening. Thanks to Shachi Kurl of the Angus Reid Institute, Christian Bourque of Leger, and our own Eric Grenier. Election 2019 officially starts tomorrow, but it's already game on for the leaders and their parties. How ready are they to hit the hustings, and what should we expect over the next 40 days? Time for the Power Panel. In Toronto, political consultant and columnist Tiffany Gooch. Right next to her, former Conservative Cabinet Minister Stockwell Day. And here with me in studio, political commentator and former NDP MP Françoise Boivin and the CBC's very own Evan Dyer. Hello, everyone. Hey. Happy Election Eve. Françoise is very excited.
I'm so excited. I'm not there as a candidate, if you only knew.
Yeah, why don't I start off with you? What are you feeling about the choice of the day? I mean, we've all been speculating. Will it be today? Will it be Sunday? It's going to be tomorrow. What's your thought on the pick?
To be quite honest, I was a bit surprised to hear that it would be tomorrow, because when I was talking with a lot of people and they were asking me, now I sound like a total idiot, I said, I can't foresee anybody doing anything on September 11 for all type of reasons that we all know about. And I don't think they would be bold enough to go on a Friday the 13th, although they want to depict the Conservatives as scary, might be a good concept. So that being said, it left the 12. I'm like, they won't be that bold during the McLean debate. So I was still set on next weekend. So I lost all the bet I took on that front. Will pay up.
Most power panelists had picked Sunday, so you're in good company.
Yeah, but with some of my friends, I'm totally I will have to pay up. But so it was a bit surprising. At the same time, I'm still thinking that maybe they wanted to go last weekend, and because there was some echo from that front. But with Hurricane Dorian, it would have looked pretty heartless. So they still wanted to get that little element of surprise. I mean, that's the only thing they control. They don't control the end date. So they knew we were all talking about the 15th or the 14th in my case. So by doing so, they will keep a bit of the edge. The Conservatives were starting. So why not go from the start, because there's just a few days left that they could decide.
Stockwell, given all your experience in campaigns, how important is this starting position? How important is the first few hours, the first day?
Well, very important. You can set the tone, or you can at least try to set the tone. I'm not surprised that this was the day that was picked, and I think really there's not a whole lot of magic, because they want to make sure the Manitoba election was over with. I appreciate what François was saying about September 11th, but dates like that, you can only work around to a certain degree. And when it comes to catastrophic events, especially related to terrorism, the message countries like to send out is we move on. This doesn't stop everything we do. So I don't think that will be a factor at all. But setting the tone, as you said, that's the aim of every leader. And we can see, and I guess we're talking about that later on, you can plan to set a certain tone, and then something you or another leader says can quickly alter that. And everything you have planned and the best laid plans, et cetera, all of a sudden go awry because something else leaps into the spotlight. That's what's going to be interesting in the weeks ahead.
Tiffany, if we're talking about setting the tone, what do you expect as far as the leaders are concerned? What tone do you think they want to set?
So I think for each leader, they're looking to, first of all, at least control their narrative. So tone-wise, they definitely want to have something that's positive and easy for people to connect with and feel positive towards what that vision is that they're putting forward. But I think there's always going to be a lot of messages that are coming out that are not within the message they were hoping would come out, to say other campaigns that are throwing out pieces that throw off their message for the day. So I think really just having control of their narrative is the most important piece, and something that motivates their volunteers. The dropping of the writ is a massive moment for donors really to be motivated, for people to really feel like they need to be out and helping and knocking on doors on the ground. And so it really becomes that galvanizing moment to get your people out.
If you're trying to frame the narrative, Evan, I've been thinking a lot about, okay, if you're whichever party, what is the narrative of this election right now? It's not easy to pick a single issue that this election will be fought on, but no. I know they each have their hopes as to what that issue will be. What do you think?
Well, I guess that when you pick your narrative, it's driven partly by where you want to make gains, or at least hold on to what you have. And I guess an example of that would be the Conservatives. If you think back over the last little while, they've been knocking the government on pipelines and carbon a lot, and yet the issue that they've chosen to run on is affordability, which isn't something they've really talked about necessarily that much. But then when you look at a map of Canada and you see where they need to pick up seats, talking about pipelines will score you a lot of points in ridings where you already have a 70% majority in Alberta and Saskatchewan. But the problem the Conservatives have is that their vote is poorly distributed. It's not effectively or efficiently distributed across Canada. They need to make inroads in Quebec, where talking about pipelines is very unhelpful. So I think that we can see how parties are driven towards certain messages by certain geographical imperatives, it's who do you need to be talking to in order to get the votes in the key places that will get you to the number that you need to get to, and then that becomes your message.
And those key battlegrounds right now, François, seem to be driving a whole lot. I mean, you have a situation now where the campaign starts where the two parties are quite literally, according to the poll tracker, dead set in a tie, right? That will, I think that lends itself to the idea that these crucial areas of the country are really going to feed into the messages that we hear.
And I know for the different parties, it's so important, the narrative from the get-go, because if people as a whole think that you're losing that battle from the get-go, might be hard to recoup them. But if they think that it is a dead heat, even though people have not gone into the numbers really within and saying, a bulk of this, all the numbers don't necessarily represent all the seats. So for the Conservatives, it's important tomorrow, because for me, there's two campaigns. Definitely a Canadian campaign and a Quebec campaign. And the leaders all know about that. And that's why Andrew Scheer, if my information is correct, is starting tomorrow in Trois-Rivières, Three Rivers, because it's the heart. It's an ex-mayor who's there. It's a good battleground for them. They need to jumpstart, not let the bloc start too fast there, because don't forget, if I had to bet on organization, I bet on the Conservatives before the Bloc and the Green, because they have yet to organize all these ridings. The Bloc had, I think, just 5 associations throughout the 78 ridings. The Green has pretty much nothing. So they're writing on what we're saying about them and what the public opinion is shaping to be. So they're all happy when we talk about these guys. But Andrew Scheer has to look like a maybe prime minister in waiting, that he's ready to fight in Quebec. Will people listen to the message is another idea, but that's always where I look, where the leaders are, which riding they visit. Is it because they're ahead, behind, they want to keep, and that tells a lot of the story.
Stock, as for those ridings that they're going to concentrate on, the areas of the country they're going to concentrate on, how do you think that they will inform the narratives each party wants to put forward?
One thing they're going to have to keep in mind, I agree with Françoise in terms of there is opportunity in Quebec, but tone, as you mentioned, is really going to be important here. And I think it's fascinating that Justin Trudeau was saying for months this is going to be a really negative campaign, suggesting it would be others who would start it out as negative. But
he said it would be nasty, and then I think Andrew Scheer also said it would be nasty. Everyone said it's going to be so nasty.
Right. So I was surprised at the tack they took as recently as yesterday, going after the issue of low income. Andrew Scheer is quite rightly talking about his low income roots in terms of his family and some of their financial struggles. And wow, right out of the bat comes all kinds of jokes about low income and low income families. I'm honestly, as a strategy, I'm surprised at that, because I think there could be a price to pay for the Liberals. But Justin Trudeau is kind of living up to his word there. He said it was going to be nasty. It's starting out that way. So the challenge as these leaders move around the country is really getting to the message they want to get on a local basis. But as you know, the reporters that travel on the campaigns, they will ask questions that are usually of a national level of interest. So that's going to be the ongoing challenge.
What are you expecting as far as tone is concerned, Tiffany?
Well, I mean, I think for every campaign, there's sort of two camps that are working on different things, and they'll be successful and in different ways. And every campaign is working to ensure that on a daily basis, they are getting their own positive message out, and at the same time are looking to find ways to define their opposition. And so I think both are happening, absolutely. And then across the board, they're just going to be doing the best that they can to connect directly with voters. So not just what they're talking about, but the visuals that we'll see throughout the campaign, the backdrops and how they're looking as if they're engaging with voters. I think for the next little while, they'll be looking for all sorts of different ways to really connect with the emotional connection for voters as they're making these decisions moving forward.
I like Tiffany's very diplomatic way of saying they're going to be nice, and they're going to be positive, and then they're going to be nasty. I'll translate it. I'll put words in your mouth, Tiffany. I mean, there will be certainly a presentation of here's our ideas, but we've already seen to a certain degree. I mean,
right.
The tone that's going to happen.
And mostly, I think we think of nastiness between the two front-running parties, the Liberals and the Conservatives. Mostly that's what we think about. And so far, that's mostly been true. But we had a little preview of some potential nastiness between the NDP and the Greens last week, right? With the episodes in New Brunswick. And I wouldn't be surprised to see that get nastier as well, because those are two parties that are competing for the same votes in many places. There's a lot of races, like in BC, for example, where both are contenders. And I know that the NDP feel a need to claw back progressive votes from the Greens, that the way that they're going to do that, somebody used the phrase, portraying them as conservatives on bicycles. So I'm expecting to see a lot of wedge issues, including the abortion topic.
Which is exactly what we are about to discuss. Right. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching.